All right, Napsters, let's get subterranean and nerd out for a bit. But first, a few disclaimers. So, one is that music can be very therapeutic, but it is also not the same thing as therapy. So, if you experience prolonged emotional distress, especially when listening to any artist, please reach out for help, whether that's asking someone who is safe for you in your personal life or reaching out to a professional. And for those of you who are in the United States, you can always call or text 988 for crisis support. The other disclaimer is that this video is for folks who love the question why. So if you are a fan of Sleep Token and came here out of a passing curiosity, I'm going to suggest that you pause and consider something as you continue, before you continue, right? So if you deeply connect with their music and find solace in your own experience of it, this may or may not be for you at this, like, the right thing to listen to or consume at this point in time. I'm a huge Sleep Token fan. And I am also a therapist and the type of person who really likes to understand why I feel what I feel or why something evokes a particular response. So I engage in these sort of introspective, deep exploratory questions every day. So this is just how I operate. If that is, that curiosity is not necessary to enjoy and benefit from the music that you connect with, right? So your personal experience with somebody's art is worth protecting, especially if it has meaning for you. So when we start to ask why questions and dive deeper into, unpacking what about that particular art is so meaningful to us or what makes it that way, it can often reveal insights and levels of awareness that are hard to put back in the box. So if it doesn't feel like the right time to analyze the psychodynamics of this band further, then thanks for stopping by, and maybe I'll see you at a ritual. All right. So again, I don't want to in any way negatively affect somebody's experience with Sleep Token, or any band really. And also, this is the kind of shit that I think about and talk about all the time. So I wanted to explore it with you all, for those of you who are like me. So if you're still with me, let's get into the highlights, and then you can decide if you want to follow me further down the rabbit hole. So there are 3 critical practices that Sleep Token embodies through their art that can support the emotional healing process. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've also been through I have my own story, spoiler alert, pretty much any therapist has been through something pretty fucked up, and that's part of why they became a therapist. So there's layers to it. It's a huge generalization, but, we're all human. So all of that to say, there are 3 things that I notice with Sleep Token that I want to sort of highlight and sort of unpack a little bit, because I think it's brilliant. And I don't know, I think there's a level of intentionality to it. I don't know if it's as deep as I'm about to go, but, we'll have fun with it. So the 3 things that I see them doing are psychoanalytic projection, which is actually like a very Freudian thing, and they've been very explicit about recognizing or acknowledging that everybody's projecting, including themselves. So I want to unpack that further. Somatic release through artistic expression, especially like sonically and physically. So there's a lot there. Lyrically, there's so much. Anyway, so somatic release of, trauma and difficult emotions. And then meaning making, which I think is perhaps maybe the most obvious, given the sort of culture around lore and storytelling and, myth making and all that kind of stuff. But I want to get into that a little bit more with the way that Sleep Token sort of executes that. Now, the other disclaimer I just want to share here is like, I am not a metalhead. I am not um, a musical theorist. I am a therapist. So I am very much just coming at this through the lens of, the human experience cognitively and emotionally, from what I've learned so far, right? So again, like, this is not meant to be any sort of authoritative, like, like explanation or analysis of like whether something, like, there's no right or wrong. This is really just like, let's explore, let's go spelunking. And like, there's part of this, or part of what I think, what for me, why I'm drawn to Sleep Token and music in general, and artists who do what Sleep Token does really well, which is using the art of narrative as a mechanism for healing and processing, like reclaiming the narrative or reframing a story or challenging a narrative. So that's something that I love to work with my clients and for myself. But let's hone in on these sort of three things with Sleep Token first, or in general. And if you like this, let me know, and we'll see whatever. Words are fun. So, all right, guys, that said, through the looking glass we go. So first up, let's talk about projection. So Sleep Token is deeply committed to the anonymity of the humans behind the masks, right? So I think there are some individual motivations behind this, or at least there were in the beginning, and I might mention that later, but generally, but like the concept and commitment to that level of anonymity, I think, is bigger than just the sort of personal preferences or needs of any of the band members at any time, right? In part because of how they have spoken about projection. And as a therapist, what stands out to me is that this is a really artful use of traditional Freudian psychoanalysis. So in this modality, the therapist does not speak, or does so very rarely, maybe to just ask a question, or sort of make like a really objective observation, because in traditional psychoanalysis, the objective is to elicit the client's subconscious fears, desires, and narratives, and then allow the client to process and draw their own conclusions through a more conscious understanding of themselves. So let me slow down. So basically, the idea is the therapist is essentially, a blank slate. You're not supposed to know anything about the therapist. They're not reacting or responding to what you're saying. They're remaining very neutral. And so, and especially, at least in the beginning, they're giving you the space to talk and express yourself. And through that process, you're revealing anything that you're saying or perceiving that's coming from the therapist is really revealing sort of things that were maybe buried in your subconscious, or that you had less awareness or insight around, that now that it's getting drawn out, you can actually work with it, you can address it, you can explore it. So if I'm getting really defensive because my therapist isn't saying anything to me, then that's an invitation to explore, what is it about not being acknowledged or not feeling heard, right? Like, there might be that might be something that's coming up, right? So then we unpack that further. So, but all of that is entirely, in this modality, the way it's practiced is entirely contingent on that sort of blank slate, like sort of as little bias as possible about the therapist, right? Like, you're only perceiving what you see in front of you, and they're not giving you any information, any kind of feedback to work with in the beginning until you start to, unveil these things that might have been hidden in the depths of your subconscious. So with Sleep Token, right? The band acknowledges that, projection in general is part of the human experience, and especially with art. So, and they've talked about in one of their interviews how their mission is to create a constructive emotional transformation. So, in fully embracing a brand and a sort of identity, like artistic identity, that invites that kind of experience of emotional transformation, where their anonymity creates a space for people to fully engage with their music through the lens of their own experiences as fans, as listeners, right? So all of us who are listening to Sleep Token and hearing different stories or hearing different things in their music, from this perspective, all of it is true, all of it is valid. There is no such thing as like the story, right? The factual truth behind the lyrics, it doesn't matter because they were written to evoke an emotional experience in the listener, while it also allows Vessel as the artist to process and release big, often difficult feelings safely, right? And so this is part of what gets me to perhaps some of the personal reasons for this, dedication or this approach of pure anonymity. I think there's a very real artistic motivation, and I get the sense from Vessel's responses in interviews and his art, his words, his lyrics, that the human has a really hard time being perceived. It's something that doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't feel safe, receiving that kind of attention or sort of getting that kind of focus on him. And so, so in some ways it serves as a point of safety, that mask, but it also creates a more open, engaging, and reciprocal dynamic with the listener, right? Like it creates this mutually reciprocal exchange in the sense that the audience can connect personally and empathically with the emotions and the images that the lyrics and the music evoke for them, while Vessel can be fully vulnerable to express what cannot be contained, right? And somewhere in the catharsis of it all, we co-create a narrative that helps us navigate and transform whatever emotional turmoil we are feeling and healing, right? So that's my psychotherapeutic, take or analysis or explanation of, why the anonymity and why Sleep Token talks about projection, and part of where that comes from. Like there's a real intentional and effective purpose behind that. There's ways that we can use projection as a vehicle for exposing the things that need attention, or that need healing. And when an artist is able to create with that in mind, understanding that it's not about them and their story, it's about the experience that they're creating by telling their story in the way that they want to tell it, or as ambiguously as they want to tell it, then it creates room for the audience and for the listener to really engage with it in a much deeper way and form their own connection to it. So it gets at that sort of deeper level and that deeper need for human connection and witnessing. So that's just right. Like isn't that, I don't know. I feel like that's amazing. I love that. And again, there are other artists that do this or that can do this. But for whatever reason, for me, Sleep Token is just like really exceptional in their ability. And I think it's also because of this sort of, there's a certain level of cohesion to what they do and how they execute it, that seems, at least to me, seems really consistent compared to other artists where there's either less consistency or because, I think part of it is, when you do know who the artist is and you can Google their personal narrative and you do know all of these details about their lives, it becomes about the artist and not the art. or that intermingling comes in. And so again, I think that's also part of what Sleep Token has been trying to evade and avoid by remaining anonymous. And, if they ever change that, frankly, I think they've built enough trust and confidence in their fans that, people will go with it. And I think there's a level of intentionality in the things that they do and when they do them and how they do them that I think if they ever do, unmask themselves, there's going to be more intention behind it. Anyway, so the next thing to talk about, that was a whole tangent, but somatics of art and trauma recovery is the next thing that I want to talk about that they do. So one thing that happens, at least for me, when listening to the lyrics of their discography is that a narrative emerges of a tragedy. And, we'll get into more of the lore around sleep and the gods and the sort of spiritual elements next, in the next topic. But the gist here is that, beyond or sort of separate and apart from, but also connected to that spiritual journey, is an experience where there was a lover who struggled as much as he as Vessel with mental health, and they were in a toxic codependent relationship. And at some point there was an accident, and he survived, and the lover did not. And the trilogy of albums is a way of processing not just the relationship, but also its tragic end, as told through a sort of spiritual transformation guided by the deity sleep, that, the sort of accident or the tragedy, was sort of served as that kind of wake-up call. And so, that interpretation, that's a really broad summarized version of what I get from listening to the lyrics. And that interpretation might be my own projection, right? So that's part of why I covered that topic first. So, the narrative aside, it doesn't really matter again if that is the narrative or not. That is the story that kind of comes forward for me. But part of, again, there's this human tendency of, we create story to help make sense of things, which is what I'll talk about in the next topic. But, narrative aside, what that kind of exploration of tragedy and grief and relationship, it weaves emotions throughout the albums that are a reflection of survivor's guilt, of blame, shame, anger, grief, relief, pleasure, romanticism, all of the things, right? And, when we're talking about, the sort of somatic, the psychology of it, right? Or the sort of the psychodynamics here, the amount of pain and agony that Vessel seems to have experienced, compounded by grief and guilt and everything in between, with all of these other experiences, or with whatever the sort of other narrative implies, it's a lot for any one person to carry, right? No one should ever have to suffer the weight of their pain alone or in silence. And doing so is a recipe for self-destruction. So I'm going to take us on a little side quest for a minute. But I promise it's related, and we'll get back to Sleep Token. So many years ago, I experienced a violent trauma at the hands of someone else. And, after it happened, I told one person, and then I tried to pretend that nothing happened, right? I wanted to just be if I don't think about it, it never it can be it never happened, and I never have to deal with it, or anything that any of the consequences of it, or any of any of it, anything, purely avoidant and denial, right? And so I poured myself, as a way of trying to distract myself and convince myself that like avoiding it was the way to go. I poured myself into one of my preferred art forms. So as far as everyone else in my life was concerned, I was just a moody bitch who was really into Latin dancing. You know what I mean? But that dancing was my lifeline. And I got really good at it because it was the only space and activity that felt safe enough for me to be in my body, right? I would do it multiple hours, multiple days a week, like 5 hours on Saturday, just training, not even just like social dancing or practicing, right? Just learning and practicing and getting the technique down and all of the things, right? I dove into it. And so it was a space that allowed me to feel safe in my body. And it also allowed me to emote and express all of the pain and anguish that I would otherwise numb with food and wine and isolation and other things that I would self-medicate with, essentially, when I didn't have that like a way that I could physically release it. So, and eventually I sought help, which led to a whole other crucible, but that's another story, right? But my point is that without the dance and the music and the poetry of that time and after, and the communities that they opened up to me, I cannot confidently say I would still be here, right? And I think a lot of us, I share this story knowing that there's probably many of you who may be watching this, whoever this reaches, who have something similar, right? There's something that you give yourself to or gave yourself to that is saving your life in some way, or that once did. And now hopefully you're in a much better place, right? Hopefully most of the people watching this are not in crisis or that place. You know what I mean? But the point is that there's a level of catharsis and much needed support for the body that art offers, that words or sort of therapy doesn't fully accomplish, right? These are complementary. That's why, like, the art is therapeutic. It's a release. Therapy is its own thing. And if you're in a really difficult, if you are dealing with something really challenging, both together is I think the ideal, until you get to a point where, your art form is enough. You have the support and the skills that you need. But all of that to say, I think that, whatever trauma's vessel did or did not experience, music is that release valve for him. That it's that lifeline. I think the mastery that he demonstrates and with his, like, particularly like with the artistic vision and the lyricism and the whole concept and like that execution, I think that in part comes from and again, this is pure speculation, but I think that can come from, or is a reflection of, like, this is the way to release whatever it was or whatever it is that he carries, that is hard to carry, and to share it, right? And I think for many of us, listening to music in general and listening to their, like, Sleep Topicans music is that escape, and it's a medium that allows us to experience feelings that are otherwise overwhelming, right? So again, it's this, like, mutually beneficial, like, creative experience, and I think Sleep Token evokes that somatic experience. When I say somatic, it means, more like feel it, like physical, like the sort of feeling it in your body through movement, through engaging your muscles, through doing an activity that sort of helps you connect that, like, make that sort of mind-body connection. and releases whatever like emotions or traumas are sort of stuck physically in your body. And so there's lots of different ways to do that. But I think part of why Sleep Token is so effective at their execution of this is because it's a question of survival. It's that big, and the anonymity creates the safety that allows Vessel and the other band members to be vulnerable, right? And they model that in the way that they perform, right? They're able to be fully present in the music in the moment, like they're just, like, you can tell, like, part of what makes them, I think, so captivating to watch on stage is because they're just in it, right? They're connected to each other, they're connected to the music, they're connected to the audience. And because it's just about the music. It's about that release. It's about that expression and nothing else, And for a lot of us, that's what it is. Or like, and there are artists that, like, that's what they strive to do, right? And to provide. But for some, there's a level of like entertainment value or like things like that end up taking center stage that are still very powerful. It's just a different form of, storytelling and, a different way of evoking that kind of experience or creating that kind of experience. But I think it really comes out in like, with the sort of visceral vulnerability that Vessel is able to sort of express and capture, and both in his lyrics, in the composition of the songs, and then in the performances, right? It creates a permission for each of us who are experiencing, whether it's, through our headphones at home or if we're able to make it to a show, it creates that permission for us to be in our own vulnerability in those moments too, right? That's one of the beautiful things and challenging things about human nature and vulnerability is that in order for me to feel safe being vulnerable with you, it helps if you're vulnerable first. If you show me that you're willing to sort of expose your soft belly, you know what I mean? Like, if you show me that you're not a threat, that you're not in a defensive mode, or that that it is safe to be open because you're so open, that's something that is really beautiful, and it creates that, again, that reciprocal exchange. So singing along, playing covers, making art inspired by the music, moshing, dancing, whatever, it offers that channel for fans to find their own somatic release through the music as well, right? And so again, I don't think this is something exclusive to Sleep Token. I just think they do it exceptionally well because they're really consistent in their delivery, their use of story, and the anonymity factor, which creates that safety for people to engage so openly with their own experiences. And I think that, like, the level of consistency that Sleep Token has in how they execute and deliver on their craft is rooted in, it's a matter of survive. Like, there's nothing, like, or at least in the beginning, right? There's no other option if they were going to survive. That's 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 sort of the sense that I get. And it might not be that extreme, right? It might not be that extreme, but there is that level of like raw, unbridled, honesty in the suffering of, like, the suffering aspects of the human experience. It's not, but anyway, we're going to get into that part now. So anyway, now with the meaning making, this is another area that I am just generally interested in. So, with Sleep Token, they use lore and spiritual mysticism, and there's, part of that is seems to be like connected to the genre of music. But I think, again, it adds to their allure and the loyalty of their fans, because as humans, we are hardwired to make meaning, right? So we're hardwired to understand the context of our experience, to try and contextualize it. And a large part of this has to do with our biological drive for survival and safety, right? We don't like uncertainty, because uncertainty means that there could be a threat somewhere. And we need to understand whether our environment is safe and what threats might exist, right? And as we've evolved and become more complex beings, and the what survival looks like for modern human society has evolved, and so there's a level of more philosophical and existential elements to this drive or this need to make meaning, right? And so part of, I think science, spirituality, and religion are all siblings in our efforts to provide a sense of meaning to the human experience, to explain why something is the way it is, or what it means, or, to understand, what is the point, right? Even if the answer to that is there is no point, and then that allows our brain to go, oh, okay, well, then we can let that go and move on to the next thing, right? And so regardless of, how you get there, at the end of the day, any and all belief systems and systems for explaining how and why things work the way they work in the context of humanity, it's to help us as humans define and make sense of the world around us. It helps us understand our role or our purpose in this particular place and time. And it helps us inform our sense of safety and connection. And it also, again, helps us navigate uncertainty. And so, with the lore and mythos of Sleep Token, it serves as a tool to contextualize and offer a way for people to make meaning of their art, right? So if you don't have that immediate personal reaction or response, or if as you're listening, you're trying to understand what's happening, or why are we even talking about this, or what is the point of connection here, the lore and the mythos helps to provide some of that context. It's another point of connection that places the emotional anguish into something bigger, right? And perhaps more meaningful than just life is pain and we're all fucked. So, the spiritual guided transformation narrative of engaging with this deity called sleep, and the sort of journey that sleep sends Vessel on, is, a way of sort of saying life is pain, we're all fucked, but there is hope for redemption and transformation if we strive to survive the process, right? It's worth trying. It's worth making the effort, right? And so I think, again, there's a therapeutic quality to that. And so, if you don't connect deeply with it, it still provides a context. It provides, a point of connection for understanding what Vessel is trying to communicate and express, to make meaning of it, to make sense of it. So you still have that point of entry into engaging with the art, into engaging with the sort of cohesion of what they're trying to offer. And then, for me, I'm someone who practices a form of animism, and I'm very drawn to the way Sleep Token has sort of syncretically integrated these ancient wisdom practices and traditions into their art. And I think from what I've gathered from other fans too, there are a lot of fans who come from a background of religious trauma, or who are otherwise craving that sense of meaning that modern reality does not offer, right? That more existential space to explore, that existential framework to explore, like, what is the point? Why are we here? Right? That is something that as humans, we're constantly engaging with that. Like we're wrestling with that question. And when we're not, it's probably, sometimes it's a good thing, right? It just means that we're in the present moment because we're not worried about it. And that can be very good and very healthy. So if you're not wrestling with that question, there's nothing wrong with you. But if suddenly you're blindsided by like, I don't even, like, I've been doing this for so long and now I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore. There's a disconnect in how, like, in what you're doing in your context in the day-to-day of what's driving you and what's motivating you and what gives you meaning, how you make sense of the world, how you create some sort of understanding of why someone does what they do, even if the explanation is, or the answer is, just cause, or sometimes there isn't an explanation, right? So again, I think, it's not like, what is interesting to me about Sleep Token from the sort of therapeutic standpoint is, each of these elements, like, they're not necessary to enjoy their music. You don't have to like get it, to be a fan or to connect, which is part of why, I try to send any of those away who are not in the space of like intellectually engaging or like exploring and unpacking these sort of dynamics that the band kind of emulates, because it's not necessary to get what you need out of it. And I think it's really interesting to talk about and understand and explore, how when all of these elements come together, it really creates a space for people to connect with something that feels bigger than themselves, that validates and offers a form of witnessing to their own pain and suffering without dragging them down into a pit of despair. I think it's like, it's more like a way of acknowledging and releasing that pain and anguish, and, wherever it comes from, or whatever sort of nuances to it you experience. And you find the story in the music that allows you to do that. They're intentionally ambiguous in the interpretation. There are core narrative elements that creates that cohesion that sort of alludes to or implies a particular narrative, but it's this, very reciprocal sort of co-creative process or experience that we need as humans, right? Like creativity, like there's a reason why art and creativity is so, it feels so good when you can tap into it, because it's a way of releasing and, recycling and transforming things that get stuck, things that don't make sense. It's a way for us to play and try and test out different experiences, feelings, and images that help us stay centered in who we are, help us, stay present and alive to the things that make life good and beautiful and, inspiring, in spite of all of the pain and suffering and the anguish and the, oppression and, the struggles that come with being a mortal being on this planet, in the environment that we live in the context that we live in, right? They're co-present, beauty and suffering, pain and elation. You know, like they're all they like that's they're all connected. And so learning and having these, you know, having artists like Sleep Token who can so impactfully and effectively create an experience that allows their fans, that allows people who engage with them to find that for themselves, right? It's not like they're not getting hit over the head with an explicit narrative. They're not being told what to do. They're not being told how to think or how or what the answer. Like they're not being given the answers, right? We have to work for it. And I think that's also part of where the loyalty comes in from the fan base, because, you know, when we put in that effort to sort of work for our understanding of what a song or an album or the entire narrative, like the entire trilogy means to us or whatever, you know, it gives it's like a good book, right? It's like reading a really good book, and that you're like, I don't ever want to see the movie adaptation, because the version that I imagined in my head was so much more fun and fantastical and amazing and rewarding than anything that Hollywood can come up with, right? You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of experience, but with music instead of a novel. And so I think that is something that is vastly needed, because so much of us are constantly looking for answers, or we're constantly looking for distractions and things to numb us and ways of escaping that just further disconnection. And having spaces and artists who can create these types of experiences where there is a level of escape, there is a level of, you know, being able to distance ourselves from our, you know, literal reality, but it creates a container for us to sort of process those feelings or those emotions in a way that feels safer, because the stakes are lower, because it's not actually about our literal experience. It's about understanding the story, or it's about, you know, trying to solve the mystery that are the vessels, right? You know, which I don't think is the point, but that part, you know, I think the story, like creating your own story and having that sort of mutual exchange with the artists in that way is something that is really beautiful. And I hope that there are, like, you know, I hope that there are more artists who emerge or who are given a bigger platform, you know, who are doing similar types of things to create that kind of space, because I think we need that creative expression. We need spaces for play, and not just play that's like performative or, you know, bypassing of, you know, the pain and the difficulties and the things that we experience. You know, we don't have to dwell in it. We don't have to live in trauma land. But sometimes screaming and yelling and raging are what's called for, right? Sometimes throwing yourself around the mosh pit is exactly what you need. And there's lots, you know, like that kind of a thing. So there's a lot of benefit to it. And Sleep Token is one band that I've really connected with, who just does this so effectively and so well, you know. And I know that there are probably more artists out there who do similar things, or who have a similar kind of mission and vision for their art and their craft. And, you know, let's elevate them. Let's create more spaces like that, because I think it's really beautiful. And I think it's helpful for the artists too. You know, I think with, you know, what little sort of kernels of, you know, communication and response we get from the band, I think there is that element of, you know, being received the way they are, the dedication and the sort of mutual support, um, you know, it's work, you know, it's working. It's been worth it. You know, I hope they know that I hope they feel like it's worth it. You know what I mean? Um, all of the work that they've put into it and all of the dedication and you know, it can't be easy. It can't be easy to, you know, to go viral. It can't be easy to um, protect your identity, and it can't be easy to, you know, to navigate an identity that has so much fame and attention, in an identity that is averse to it, you know, if that's the case. So there's a lot to it, but, you know, power to them. And, you know, hopefully this is something that resonated with you. I know this was really long. It can be really wordy. But if this is something that spoke to you, or if you have other thoughts or evoked some other insights, feel free to share.